Hi, everyone. I am Kelly Ripkema. I am the Director of Environmental Education for the Mercer County Park Commission. And I want to welcome you to Eyes on Eagles. And I also want to wish all of you mothers out there a very happy Mother's Day. We're really glad that you all can join us. So Eyes on Eagles is a partner program between the Mercer County Park Commission, the Conserve Wildlife Foundation of New Jersey, and the Wildlife Center Friends, with sponsorship from PSE&G. In our program today, we'll be giving you an up-close look at some of the activity we've been seeing at the bald eagle nest that is at Mercer Lake. Footage is being collected from a distance from the nest so that we don't disturb the eagles. But because we're using a very high-powered lens, you all will get to have a very up-close look at what's going on inside the nest, while some of our experts are interpreting some of what you're seeing. So we will be taking questions at the end of the presentation, but if something pops into your head during our talk, please go ahead and put your question in our question and answer box. So if you all look towards the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A icon. So if you click on that, you can add whatever sort of question you have, and that's just a really easy way for us to keep track of your questions and make sure we get to them all. You can also feel free to leave a message in our chat window, and we'll get to that too. Okay, so at this point, I'll go ahead and introduce our experts to you. First off, we have David Wheeler. He is the Executive Director of the Conserve Wildlife Foundation. He's going to be starting us off with a brief history of the bald eagles in New Jersey. Then we have Christy Othmajvar, who is a park naturalist for the Mercer County Park Commission. She'll be going over some eagle biology. And then we have Kevin Biney, who is a nest watcher with the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. He will go over some eagle behavior and experiences of what he has seen at the nest. So with that, why don't we go ahead and hand it over to David Wheeler. So David, would you like to go ahead?
Sure, thanks, Kelly. And first off, what a beautiful day to celebrate Mother's Day. To all the mothers out there, I second Kelly's warmest wishes to everyone. So we're talking today about the bald eagle here in New Jersey, and even taking a closer look at Mercer County. And to put it in historical perspective, it's really an all-American recovery that we've seen from the bald eagle statewide over the last few decades. Historically, eagles, of course, were at their peak in the pre-colonial days, and while the numbers dropped over the ensuing centuries, as late as World War II, their numbers were still reasonably stable. The introduction of the chemical DDT changed that, and not just for the eagle, but for a lot of the birds at the top of the food chain, like the peregrine falcon or the osprey. DDT was so effective in terms of controlling insects in our agriculture that it unfortunately had impacts far beyond that. It went right up the food chain, and the larger animals at the top of the food chain tended to bear the biggest brunt of the DDT contamination. With each level of the food chain, it went up and accelerated to really impact those raptors like the bald eagle. Unfortunately, what happened was those birds, their eggshells became so weak that they couldn't even support the nesting weight of the parents. And so entire generations were lost to the impacts of DDT. And this was first really brought to major public awareness by the Rachel Carson seminal book, Silent Spring. In this book, in the early 60s, Ms. Carson was able to draw attention to the threat of a world without birdsong, and basically the major declines that she and other scientists had noticed were so severe and demanded some kind of action. And we were fortunate that over the next few years, the growth of the environmental awareness movement and so much both political leadership and public leadership resulted in a number of different decisions over the early 70s, outlawing DDT for U.S. agriculture, creating the Clean Water Act, which really helped spur the cleanup of our waterways that had gotten so polluted by that point, and the creation of the Endangered Species Act, for which the bald eagle was really a major impetus, one of the key species, not surprisingly as the American symbol, one of the key species where its decline really galvanized public opinion and drew support among lawmakers of both parties before it was ultimately signed in by Richard Nixon. And so the stage was set for the eagle to start making a comeback at that point. Unfortunately, the damage had already been done. Throughout the 1970s and into the early 1980s, in New Jersey, we were down to a single nest of bald eagles. And to make matters worse, for 6 straight years leading into the early 80s, that nest had failed. They had been unable to successfully hatch a healthy young eagle. And at this point, we were basically down to last-ditch efforts, kind of throwing up a Hail Mary among the scientists in New Jersey, particularly those in the Endangered and Non-Game Species Program of the State Department of Environmental Protection. And their scientists at that point undertook a couple efforts that ultimately would pay off, but at the time they did it, they had no idea just whether they would work or not. Again, starting at such a low point. First off, when the eggs were laid in this one nest, which was in a very remote part of Cumberland County called Bear Swamp, they would take that egg, replace it with an artificial one, and bring that egg while it was still viable, bring it down to a wildlife research lab in Patuxent, Maryland. And there it was artificially incubated to give the egg a chance to see through to hatching rather than being crushed as it would have been like the previous nests. Ironically, the birds they used in this lab to hatch the eagles, the young eaglets, were chickens. And you can imagine the outcry among the chicken community to learn that those chickens were basically helping what had been maybe a historic threat to the chickens across the centuries. And here they were helping them out on their comeback. But nonetheless, this little by little, this started to work. They would get the eggs to hatch, and once they were at a certain age, they would bring the young eagles back to the nest, and they were able to successfully be raised. The second part of what the scientists did, though, to help further the recovery along, since that would have taken so long just to even see if it would work or not, was a technique called hacking, where they built a small tower in this remote area, and scientists reintroduced a few young eagles, and the eagles lived in this little enclosed area and were fed by humans, but without being able to see the humans. So there was no imprinting on people. And instead, the eagles were able to get used to the habitat all around them. And once they were at a certain age, they were then able to be released into the wild. Again, no idea if this would work or not for the scientists at the time, but it did start to build back the population. And so over the course of the 80s, the eagles started to come back at first little by little. And as time went on, you started to see their comeback speed up. By the year 2000, we had 23 nesting pairs of eagles in the state, quite an increase from one just 2 decades earlier. A few years later, we were up to 48. It had doubled, and then up to 82. And by 2015, we were up to 150 nesting pairs of bald eagles. And this past year, we set records in New Jersey with the eagles reaching over 200 nesting pairs and ultimately having 249 young, both of them records, and has really created a turnaround where now, if you're looking in just about anywhere in the state, if you're near a waterway, and keeping an eye out, you have a reasonable chance of seeing a bald eagle with spending enough time outdoors. Again, just by the early 80s, that was almost impossible anywhere in the state. So it's been a remarkable recovery. And a couple of in addition to the stronger laws that had helped make this possible, to the point where they could even be removed from the federal endangered list in 2007, here in New Jersey, some of the things that really have made the biggest difference over the last 20 years were scientists from our organization, our nonprofit Conserve Wildlife Foundation, working closely hand in hand with the Endangered and Non-Game Species Program scientists, going out there to every nest in the state, to varying degrees, able to ban the young when possible, to check their health, and with a wildlife veterinarian, and to gather data from all across the state. And the data helped drive this because they were able to anticipate trends. They were able to see where were eagle nests struggling, where were they really starting to build back their numbers. And all the success they had, none of it would have been possible nearly to the degree it has been without the tremendously devoted team of volunteers, as we're going to hear from Kevin later today. This team of volunteers has done incredible work. We have 85, give or take, volunteers around the state who are so tremendously dedicated to their eagles and then they have individual pairs of eagles and nests that they are responsible for monitoring. But they know those eagles better than anyone else on the planet, these volunteers. And so I really can't say enough about the incredible work that they've done and the irreplaceable role that they've done in making this all-American comeback a reality. So with that, and one of the things that we're going to hear more about right now is just what a fascinating story it is in terms of the individual eagles as well, and the lifestyle. As you may, of course, be familiar with eagles from their status as our American icon and just as a gorgeous and stunning bird when you see one. Christy is going to give us a lot more detail about what it's like living the life of an eagle.
Hey there, thank you, David, very much. We're looking at some video here of our eagle nest over at Mercer Lake, and wow, what a nest. On average, bald eagle nests can be up to 8 feet long or 8 feet wide and 15 feet tall. Some of the record nests have been used for over 34 years, have weighed up to 2 tons, and have been 10 feet wide and 20 feet deep. If you can imagine how big and massive these things are, it's incredible. Usually they're located at the top of the canopy, so eagles can get a bird's eye view of everything that's going on around the nest so they can protect their babies. Usually they start building the nest in January with their first egg laid around Valentine's Day. On average, they'll lay about 2 eggs. They can lay 1 egg or 3 eggs, but usually it's about 2 eggs. And mom and dad will spend time taking turns incubating those eggs for about 35 days. Once they hatch, the eaglets will spend about 12 weeks in the nest, growing and getting big and working out their flight muscles so they can get big and strong and learn how to fly like an eagle. Speaking of which, when you see an eagle soaring, being able to tell the difference between them and a vulture can be a little bit tricky, but what you want to look at is the silhouette. The silhouette of a vulture is going to be more of a V shape, whereas the eagle is going to be, oh, that doesn't work with my hands. It's like a surfboard across the top of the body. Big, broad wings right on top of the body. That's the best way to tell a difference when they're soaring. Eagles are bigger than vultures. They're about 10 to 12 pounds. They do have a almost 7-foot wingspan, with females being slightly larger than the males. When they are mature, they have that white head and chocolate brown feathers. They actually don't get that coloration until they're 5 years of age. The eaglets we're looking at in the video feed right now, you can see they're all brown. They will continue to be that brown color all over for their first year. And then over the period of the next 4 years, they'll start to grow in some white feathers on the top and some white feathers in the tail until when they're 5, they've got the full white tail and the full white head. Food, a lot of people think that eagles will only eat fish. That is not true. Eagles will eat whatever they can get their talons on. So yes, they love fish, but if there's no fish available, they're just as happy to eat turtles or groundhogs or other birds or even carrion. So they're not all that picky. Let's see, what else am I missing? Oh, Another good question a lot of people ask is how long do bald eagles live? In the wild, it is expected that they live around 30 years old. The oldest eagle on record was a banded female. She was 39 years old. Now, a lot of people think that bald eagles make a noise like a hawk, you know, that iconic, I'm not going to do it on live stream. That sound that you hear when you watch a Western and there's a hawk flying through the canyon, and it's that really like cool, like, wow, that's intimidating sound. That's not what eagles sound like at all. So I'm just going to play for you what they actually sound like. It's a bit of a surprise. Can we hear that?
Christy, can you hold it up right next to the speaker?
You hear that?
Yes.
There you go.
Perfect.
You can.
So eagles are really fascinating creatures, and we definitely want to go out and check them out and watch them and just admire them. So we need to be really careful that we don't disturb them, especially when they're nesting. Usually eagles don't mind if we're checking them out when it's not the nesting season, but when it is the nesting season, they're very, very sensitive to disturbances around the nest. So there's actually a 1,000-foot buffer from the nest that you're supposed to stay back so that you don't disturb them. More is even better. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Kevin so he can share some specifics about the eagle nest over at Mercer Lake. Kevin?
Hello, everyone. My name's Kevin Biney, and me and my wife have been volunteering for the New Jersey Bald Eagle Project for the last 12 years. Altogether, we watch 5 nests, 3 in Mercer County and 2 in Burlington County. And we've picked them up as our years have gone on. But the 3 that are in the Mercer County area are ones I pay attention to a lot, especially one on Mercer Park or Mercer Lake, just to keep everybody, you know, abreast of what's going on here, because that is a visible nest from the lake area, and that's the one that Conserve Wildlife and Mercer County Parks get a lot of questions on. Basically, what you're seeing now is the video of these guys that are roughly about 5 weeks old. So this week makes them 6, which means that they're at their fully grown stage. So as David had mentioned earlier, if we were going to ban this particular pair for some reason, this would be the weeks that we would want to do it. 1, because they're fully grown, so the bands won't slip onto them or cause any issues later on as they're growing more. And also mainly because of the fact that this stage, they can't really hop out of the nest or move out of the nest or branch or anything like that, so they're very easy to catch. It's a process that involves climbing a tree in some cases. Sometimes we're lucky enough to be able to use PSE&G bucket trucks to raise up and grab them to be able to do this. Once they're on the ground, there's biologists down there, there's veterinarian down there. They're basically checking them for health. They're taking blood samples to get checked out to make sure, you know, contaminant wise that might be in the lake, if there was any. Usually we get lucky and nothing's happening that way. But also they can take measurements on them, on both their talons and on their beaks, and they can determine whether or not they're male or female. This pair at the Mercer Lake is now going on 3 years. One of the male himself is a banded bird from New Jersey that was from down in the Jacobstown area, down near Great Adventure, and his number is D47. So if you happen to see him flying around the lake and catch a photo and look later on to see the band, it is D47 is the male. The female in this nest is not banded. This nest right now is the 2nd year in this location. When they first came to Mercer Lake, they were in a different nest. And over the winter time, they decided to abandon that nest and move over to where they are now. Um, Reasons being, maybe the camera that we put up could have spooked them. But most possibility is that nest was used that particular winter by a lot of eagles. We had a great winter at that lake back in 2018, and a lot of different ages and a lot of different sizes used that nest. So the parents might have considered that a threat and not their nest anymore. So we got lucky and they moved 10 trees over, unfortunately out of view of the camera that's up there, but closer to the lake and a little bit more off of the area where they were, so there's less human traffic going on in that particular area. This nest that you're looking at now is actually its first year, second year in this tree, but first year nest. Last year's nest, if everybody remembered going out there, as the season went on, slowly slipped, and eventually fell. So they got smarter, they shifted the nest over a little bit, and now it is definitely a huge nest for a first year nest. So these guys were not taking a chance that this one was gonna fall. One of the exciting things that happened with this nest last year is they had 2 eaglets, one male, one female. We were able to determine that later on as time went on when we saw them sitting side by side. But the male actually was found on the ground of this nest. Either fell out, either got pushed out by the sibling, or might have got knocked out by accident by a parent coming in. Hard to say. Went out to do my nest watching and actually found him on the ground. Didn't find it at first, but heard noise and saw movement out of the corner of my eye, which brought me to where this little guy was. He got rescued. He was 9 weeks at that time, so he was not able to fly, should not have been able to fly, but got lucky when he fell, had no broken bones, no nothing. Took him to the Mercer Wildlife Center where he got checked out. Was probably on the ground for about a week because he was malnourished and dehydrated. He was brought back to good health, and we got lucky with this nest because of that abandoned nest that the adults had. We were able to put him back in that nest, and the parents were able to kind of care for him a little bit. And I say that only because of the fact that when we put him back with a big supply of food, thinking that he was going to be there for a couple of days. Within 2 days, he had fledged. He left that nest and only came back to finish whatever food was in there was left. But we found him a couple of days later, actually back at the original nest. So if his sibling pushed him out, basically they got the, okay, I'm back, not knocking me out this time. So if you happen to see a little juvenile eagle flying around Mercer Lake, his band number is number E89. And at that particular moment on the video, you happen to see the mother come in, and she actually had a fish that she brought in with her.
Wow.
So that was actually very good footage at the time when we took this, that we got lucky that she came in. If you're out at Mercer Lake and you see the adults not at this nest, a lot of times there's a high power tower right by that nest that she seems to be sitting on a lot. It's above the nest, and it's a very good view of the lake, and it's a very good view of the area. So I've been out there a couple of times where I've seen hawks circle above the overhead, not even going near the nest, and mama would take off right after them. Basically, when they get to be about this age, they're going to be able to start feeding themselves. So the parents kind of come in, bring food, drop it off, hang out a little bit in the branches above, and then go back to their tower. It's very good watching. Once you're going to get to another 3 weeks, it's going to be their 10th week. If you're out there watching, you're going to see a lot of flapping going on in the nest. Basically, they're strengthening their wings. They're testing their wings and the winds that are coming by, and you'll actually see them get some lift off of there. The next week after that, the 11th week, you'll see them both start branching, which means that they're getting off of the nest and they're sitting on branches above the nest, still in the same tree. And then at about the 12th week, if you get lucky enough, you're going to actually see them fly from that nest. They will continue to come back to the nest for a little bit because they know that as a source of food. Eventually, the parents, there you go, you can see the fish that she just brought in. Small, but it was food. Eventually, you'll see the parents not bringing food back to the nest and trying to entice the eaglets to follow them. They go down and they kind of teach them at the lake for say of going to catch food themselves, but not giving it to the eaglet saying, you want it, this is how you get it. And then after about 2 months or so, eaglets will just take off on their own and start their own lives. One of the reasons why they take about 5 years to get their white head is a good thing is that they're learning to be juveniles out there. They're learning to hunt and survive on their own. But when they start getting that white head, other adults now know they're ready to start courtship and start bonding with them. And that's a good sign for other adult eagles out there to start looking for. It's kind of what I got.
Awesome. So we've been collecting some questions. We can start to go up to those. I noticed a couple in the chat, so just let me, let's see if I just go to the start here. How old do eagles get?
In the wild, they can live up to about 25, 30 years. In captivity, they can live a lot longer than that.
Wow. Okay. I know that there is a bald eagle that's at the Mercer County Wildlife Center. Do you have some information you can share about that eagle, Kevin?
Yes, that eagle has been there. She is going on 13 years. It was friends of ours for the Bald Eagle Project. She and her sibling, when they went out to check that nest, had fallen. They found both eaglets on the ground. They brought them to Mercer or Tri-State first, and then eventually made her way to Mercer Wildlife Center. Her sibling was able to be put back into a makeshift nest and ended up fledging without an issue. But the girl at the Mercer Wildlife Center has a broken wing that they tried to pin, but it calcified at the point of the break, so she cannot get no lift out of that wing. If you're there, you'll see her fly from one side of the cage to the other, but if she was to capture prey, she would not be able to use that wing well enough to get lift to carry it off. So it was deemed that she was non-releasable, and she now lives her life at the Wildlife Center.
Right. And she educates visitors and about the plight of wildlife and eagles in the wild. Couple other questions I see are, let's see. Do eagles mate with more than one partner?
Who wants that one? I can take it.
I'm like,
Christy, go ahead.
So typically, they will stick with one partner for that breeding season. However, the female will pick the best male there is available. So if she shows up and there's 3 males there, she will pick the one that is the fittest and most handsome to breed with that season. If that same male happens to be there for the next 10 years and he's the best choice out of all the bachelors there, she will continue to choose the best choice.
We also had a request to hear the eagle call again, Miss Christie. Could you make that happen?
I can make that happen, I think. All right, here it is.
Cool.
So there's 2 eagles calling in this video clip. So the first one is really silent because it's far away. The second one is louder because it's closer.
To me, they sound like they cackle.
Yeah, not exactly the imposing call that you would expect if you don't know.
Yeah.
Which is why they use a red-tailed hawk sound all the time for TVs and movies, because it's more intimidating. It's more of a shriek.
Yeah. Someone was wondering, how do you determine the sex of the eaglets?
Normally, you're going to tell by size. If you see them side by side, a lot of times you can tell. If you're at the Mercer Meadows nest this year, if you stop by on the bike path to see that pair, they're both the same size, and they're both about the same size as mama. So if I had to guess, I would say they're both females. Last year, if you were watching the pair at the golf course area, Mercer Lake, you would have saw the difference in size of a male or female, male being smaller than the female.
Okay. Is the banding program and numbering coordinated with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service?
Yes, yeah, the banding, everything we've done, from the start of their recovery in New Jersey has been a close coordination between the state, between U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and then between my organization, Conserve Wildlife Foundation. And so all of it has been, to be clear too, New Jersey's comeback didn't take place in a vacuum. It was very much tied in with the same work that similar states were doing in the Northeast. As our whole Eastern seaboard, we saw similar declines from DDT, and then had to kind of implement these recovery methods in line with the Endangered Species Act, and certainly coordinated with the federal agencies.
Okay, thank you. So I've opened up the Q&A list. Can you all tell me if you can still see a full screen image of the eagle video, or?
Yeah.
I do.
Okay, great, good. Okay. So one of our questions here is, how many bald eagles are in the United States?
That one we're going to have to get back to the exact number. I will say, I am familiar with the recovery nationally has followed a similar trend as New Jersey. So in other words, that same kind of slow, the decline through the 70s and early 80s, and then while it might be staggered in different years, the comeback starting by the late 80s and really picking up steam in the 2000s is very similarly mirrored both federally and in New Jersey. Probably the one place that you didn't see as much of a decline in the first place was Alaska. Alaska has always had a very healthy population, but for almost all of the continental U.S., maybe with a few exceptions, the rest of the continental U.S., you saw that same decline and then making its way back in recent years in particular.
Okay, thank
You
you.
got to keep in mind that they were taken off the endangered list back in 2007, David.
Yeah, 2007.
So that definitely shows their comeback on the totals that are out there. Each state lists their eagles different. In the state of New Jersey, your mating pair are endangered, but your single eaglets or eagles flying around juveniles are considered threatened.
Yeah, that's so in other words, they still maintain protection. That's a great point, Kevin. Maintain protection on the state side because of their status here, even though they were removed from the federal list. But then there's also other federal acts that protect bald eagles and golden eagles federally. So even though they've been removed from the endangered species list, there's still quite a bit of protection that is in place both in New Jersey and across the country. They're not allowed to just be hunted or disturbed indiscriminately.
A couple of questions about the process of banding the birds. Pat asked, where are the parents while they are being banded?
Parents are usually flying overhead or usually perched nearby, usually making the sounds that Christy had stated earlier. They do not, like other raptors, come within range of the people that are either up by the nest or the bucket trucks. Once they're done banding, basically they're brought down, go through the banding process. For New Jersey, it's a green band that goes on one foot and a silver band that goes on the other one for the federal band. once they're put back in the nest, depending on how many eaglets were in that nest, they'll usually put them back with a couple of fish. So when the parents do make their way back shortly after we leave and disperse, they're kind of surprised that nothing went on and that there's food in the nest.
And it's interesting, the parent eagles during the banding process, they're, as Kevin mentioned, they're flying above. They're not doing anything that we would say would be aggressive typically, unlike some of the other raptors that went through similar declines and recoveries. Osprey seemed to be much more alarmed or much more visibly, ready to get their chicks back. And again, I should clarify, we do all these very, very quickly, and it says the scientists doing this and volunteers doing this are extremely well trained, and they have it down to a science, frankly. But peregrine falcons, being the best example, are extremely aggressive, and they'll even dive bomb at the scientists when they're getting the chicks. So very different. The eagles, it's almost like we know we're the kings of the forest here. So you guys do what you have to do, get them back up in the nest. That's not scientifically what they're thinking, but that's the feeling we get from them.
Mm-hmm. How often do the parents visit the nest, and how old are they when they fly?
They're at their 12 weeks when they're going to finally fledge and take off. The parents are usually at the nest, or at least the female is there most of the time until about their 6th or 7th week. And then the female is still within range of that nest, but just perched someplace else, giving the juveniles room in the nest themselves.
Okay. Couple of questions about predators. What are the eagle's main predators?
Besides humans,
Other than
great
people.
horned owls.
Yeah.
Really?
People by far, right, Kevin? And
Yes.
great horned owls are a threat to young eagles.
Okay.
One quick mention at the Duke Farms Eagle Cam a couple of years ago, a red-tailed hawk, a foolhardy red-tailed hawk, decided to swoop in middle of the day on an active eagle nest to try to attack the young. And the parent eagle made such short work of that hawk. I mean, 30 seconds, that battle was over. Final score, Eagles 1, Hawks nothing.
It was a dare.
It had to have been a dare.
It had to be a dare.
Will eagles eat the eaglets of other couples? Can you tell us a little bit about inter-eagle competition?
You're asking about another adult eagle attacking another adult eagle?
Yes, and then possibly, what effect that might have on any eaglets that are in a nest.
If a female decided that she wanted to take over another nest and it had eaglets in there, she would take it over, and unfortunately the little ones probably would not make it.
It's not something you see happen a lot, right, Kevin? I mean, it happens.
No, definitely not. Diane Nickerson, who runs the Mercer County Wildlife Center, will tell you a great story about an eagle that they had in there. It was a female adult that came into the nest, was kicked out by another female. Her wounds were taken care of, and this female is about to fly off the nest, if I remember the video correctly.
Yep.
There she goes. But the female was healed and taken back up around the Buffalo-Canadian border. 3 days later, she was back at her original nest and kicked that female out. So it doesn't happen often, but you do get aggression out there, especially now that the population's coming back. It is one of the things you do happen to see as territorial. Somebody had asked earlier how many eagles' nests this lake could hold. It depends on the adults. If they built their nests far away from each other, you might get lucky. Close to each other, it's not really going to happen. They're going to control their territory.
Okay.
And the combat can be extremely fierce between adult eagles when they are fighting. I mean, we do have deaths pretty much every year from adult eagles that basically get their talons locked and end up crashing into a tree or in some other way getting caught where one of the eagles basically can't dislodge their talons from each other. So it can be a life or death struggle when it does happen.
I see a bunch of questions about pertaining to ID and do both the male and females have the white head, and how do you tell the male in adult males and females apart?
So both males and females have the white head and the white tail. Only adult eagles at 5 years old, they get the white head and tail. When they're younger than 5, they're brown all over, and progressively from age 1 through 5, they get more and more white that grows in on their head and tail. The difference between a male and a female is generally size. Females are slightly larger than males, both in wingspan and in weight. So you're talking about, 8 to 10 pounds for a male and 10 to 12 pounds for a female. So they're slightly larger than the males.
If you wanted to know what a male bald eagle weighs, lift up a gallon of milk. It's exactly 8 pounds.
That's a good,
That is.
Hey,
That's
it's
a
one of
good
those
reference.
ones that people can put into perspective when you're doing that.
let's see. Someone's wondering, how do the pre-breeding aged eagles, like how do the eagles, the juveniles, spend their time once they're fledged?
They are the prime bachelors. They just go from party to party and have a good old time looking for food and hanging out with other juveniles and subadults.
They're
So wherever the
teenagers.
wind blows them.
Mhm.
Typical
enjoy-
teenager behavior. Yep.
They do tend to travel widely too. They you know, as they're basically just like teenagers, like you said, they're out exploring and finding their own path.
Sometimes when they do banding on nests, they get sponsors to donate GPS units. So when they band them, they might actually glue or attach a GPS unit to their back. And in the last couple of years, when New Jersey Fish and Wildlife has done that, they've done it with a pair of eaglets, and both eaglets never stayed together. They took off in opposite directions. So even though they were juveniles and raised together as siblings, doesn't mean they stay together.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is even going in the opposite directions. I know with one pair that Conserve Wildlife worked with the state on, one ended up in Canada, one went down to Florida, and then about a year later they were back within a couple of miles of each other down near Forsyth Refuge in New Jersey. So it's definitely an interesting journey and very individual journey for each bird.
And related to that, how do, tell us about the mother and the father. Do they stay at the nest with the eaglets? Does the father leave? How do they exchange that time?
In the nest that we actually watch, we have seen the pairs stay around the area. I see the ones over in our Princeton nest. I've gone past later on at the Mercer Meadows. I've seen them. Crosswicks Creek, I've seen them, and the same at the Burlington Fairgrounds. So in our case of the 5 nests we watch, I have seen the adults stay around the area. If you watch an eagle cam out of Florida, those 2 adults seem to take off in different directions and seem to come back when it's time for mating season, like they know. So my guess is it depends on each nest, but in our particular case with our 5 that we watch, I know ours stay around the area.
Okay.
It's Jersey, you wouldn't want to leave.
Let's see. Some questions about the history of the eagle population. So David, maybe you can address this. Wondering, do we know what the population of eagles, at least in New Jersey, what was that prior to DDT? And then also someone wondering again why, if you could tell the story about why the eagles became endangered, some of the
Oh, sure.
reasons.
So prior to DDT, we didn't have exact counts, or as close, I shouldn't say they're exact. The counts we do every year, there's always the potential we might miss a nest or two. They're just in such a remote location that no one knows about them or no one reports them. But they're pretty thorough. They're you know, if not exact, they're as close to it as you can hope to see. Prior to DDT, we of course didn't have those counts to that level of detail, but I have seen estimates that, for instance, down in Delaware Bay in New Jersey, which is the single greatest region for eagles now and then, roughly it has around 40 to 50% of our eagles are in that more or less the region that you can consider Delaware Bay, our most remote part of the state as well. And back then, I saw estimates of around 20, somewhere in the 20s, nesting bald eagles around the World War II time period. So they were stable to a degree, but they also had been sharply declined over the decades by the combination of you know, hunting from colonial settlers moving forward, destruction of their habitat, and then as the 20th century went on, impacts on the waterways and the health of the water and the land, and thus the wildlife that they would depend on for food. So you had seen, it was a pretty declined already population prior to DDT hitting, but then that's where it really sent them spiraling downward. To your other question, to just briefly reiterate how DDT did impact that, DDT was so widely used during agriculture in the years following World War II and through the 50s that it basically went right up through the food chain, and it impacted all the wildlife, you know, in its area, but it particularly impacted those birds at the top of the food chain, like bald eagles, peregrine falcons, and ospreys, and severely disrupted their breeding and made their eggs no longer viable. Too thin, the eggshell's too thin to support the nesting parent's weight, and that was the single biggest disruptor to their populations here in New Jersey and then across most of the country.
Thank you. Is there a primary mating time, and how many years do the males and females mate in general?
Go ahead, Kristen. You were going?
Well, I was waiting to hear from you, Kevin, just because I feel like I answered that already, and I thought maybe you might be able to weigh in a little bit of a different perspective.
Basically, your mating season rebuilding of a nest usually starts at the end of December, beginning of January, when the courtship starts. Even though a male might be courting with the same female, it seems like each year he has to present the nest to her to kind of woo her in. It's not an automatic that they stay together and that they, just because they're together, that they're going to continue. The nest that we watched at Crosswicks Creek, it was easy to follow because both adults at that nest at one point were both banded until the female got kicked out by another female. So it was always easy to tell that it was the same pair, which is a nice thing about banding. But usually to January, beginning of February is when courtship takes place. And it lasts for about 10 days.
Okay.
One other question, I think maybe if we could just clarify the footage that you're watching, when was that recorded, Kevin and Kelly?
It was this past Saturday, so this is at 5 weeks old.
Mm-hmm. So they're 1 week older than this.
Yes.
And we, just a little shout out, we are holding another one of these programs on June 7th. So that will show a different set of behaviors, and we'll update the video feed for that closer to the June 7th date. Ultimately, we tested it out and we found that actually collecting video with our high-powered zoom lens created a much better image for all of you. So we decided that that would be the best way to go for this program.
One of the things to keep in mind when you're watching Eagle's Nest too, and you're seeing the eaglets in there, some of them do appear smaller than others. Doesn't necessarily mean that you can tell at that point their age. When the adult female lays her eggs, she lays them in one time, 2 days later another, and then 2 days later a possible third if she's going to have that many. And they hatch in that same order. So when the first juvenile hatches and the third one hatches, there could be a week's difference possibly in that. So you can see a difference in size, which is why when you're watching eagle cams on the internet, they usually have the warnings on there that you could see stuff that could be sibling rivalry going on. That's particularly why.
Okay. So panelists, if you could open up your Q&A window and help me scroll through these questions. Everyone, thank you so much for submitting your questions to us. We'll do our best to answer them. Panelists, if you see a question that, there's the mother just flew in again. If you see a question that hasn't already been answered, I welcome you to type up.
Actually, a question, maybe a little clarification. I see a couple people asked about how often an eagle falls out of a young eagle falls out of the nest, and then why wouldn't parents feed that eaglet who had fallen out?
Kevin, how about you take that one?
Okay, I was waiting to see if someone. It's not that often that an eaglet does fall out of the nest. We just had a rarity last year and we all believe that it was just based on how that nest was not supported on one limb and how it sagged at. Unfortunately, the one might just not have been on the wrong end. The biggest thing you see with eagle's nest is if they're not supported all the way around when they're building them, and if one side starts slowly slipping, that's where you can see an eaglet falling out of the nest. I've seen it 2 or 3 years, unfortunately, and it's part of what you have to deal with as a volunteer for this project. Not everything is sweet and hunky-dory. Sometimes you end up with tragedy, which is sad. But it's all part of nature and all part of life. But it's not a frequency that you see. It's just if it's poorly designed and strong winds could take it down.
We had a few questions submitted from Chris. Perhaps we can get to some of those. Wondering what type of interactions or competition. We've already talked about competition between different eagles, different adults. Can you all speak to any competition between eagles and other bird species like cormorants, blue herons, swans, etc.?
David, you going?
I would say you might be able to speak more specifically to those birds alone. I would say eagles, like many raptors, can be harassed by crows or blackbirds if they're looked at as a threat in a given location that they're perching. You know, beyond that, you might know better, Kevin, any specifically with the herons or cormorants?
In the nest that we're watching, I don't see many disturbance. You do see a lot of red-winged blackbirds building nests within the eagle's nest, and then they consider that to be a threat, which is kind of funny. If they're building a nest in a dead tree, a lot of the hollow parts of the tree have other eagles in there or other birds in there. But the biggest rivalry that you have going on is probably more down in South Jersey between the eagles and the ospreys.
Okay.
There's a couple of questions about copulation here. And I'm going to say no, that does not occur in the air. It does occur while perched.
Thank you, Christy.
You're welcome.
Someone asked how long it takes to build a nest. Depending on the pair, it could take about a week or two to build a nest to where they want it to be. If it's a previous nest that they were nesting in the season before, they're just bringing in fresh sticks to build up on the nest. But if they're building one from scratch, good 2 weeks to get a good solid nest underneath them.
And there's a few questions about the role of the father eagle. How would you describe that, Christy?
I was noticing those questions too. So both the male and the female take turns taking care of that nest, both while it's being built, while there's eggs inside of it, and while there's babies present. So generally the female will bring the food to the nest while the male does patrols and make sure it's, safe and chases off potential threats. But they both work together. It's, Happy Mother's Day. You get a caring father who's there to support the whole process. And then once they're fledged, everybody goes about their merry way and does it again the following year.
Which is one of the reasons why they say the female is bigger than the male. The male has the maneuverability to chase off the predators, where the female has the girth on her to be able to seem dominant at the nest.
I've seen a few questions about the nest itself. For example, how long does it take them to build the nest? And also, do we know why the nest is so large?
This particular nest at Mercer Lake, they weren't taking a chance on it falling like it did last year, is my guess. This is huge for a first-year nest. And when I say first-year nest, it's because last year's nest, there was nothing left. If you're looking through your spotting scopes across the lake, there's a little bit of a piece of the nest from last year that's hanging down, and that's about all that was left from that nest.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a huge nest for a first year. This looks more like a 3 or 4 year old nest than it does a 1 year.
Mm-hmm. And if you think about it also, those nests have to be large enough to support multiple birds with 7-foot wingspans. That's the reason why they're so large. And to top that off, some of the record nests that have been up to 2 tons and 10 feet wide, that's after they've been reused for 34 years. So the eagles come back and rebuild and add to what's already there. So it increasingly over the years gets larger and larger and larger.
And both the male and female participate in building the nest, right?
Correct. Usually the female is the one who controls where the stick goes, because you do see stick battles. You really do. It is funny to watch when you're out there.
Little to the left.
The interior decoration is really important on these designs. Yeah.
And if you get a very good look at the Pennington nest, you can see how several branches have been woven in and out of the main branch of that tree for support. So they know what they're doing most of the time.
And the shape too is very much in a way that they try to minimize the chance of the birds falling out too, right? The inside, the middle part is lower than the outer rim.
Yes, when they're first born, they stay within a bowl that the parents have created, so they can't wobble themselves out. As they grow, you might even see at 6 weeks a parent bring in a stick just for reinforcement of a nest. That's not uncommon. But in their beginning couple of weeks of growing, they're in what they consider a bowl in a nest, so they can't fall out.
I think Martha has an interesting question. Would eagles leave their eaglet or kick an eaglet out of a nest if it were deformed or not developing appropriately?
I'm going to say no to that, and I have a perfect reason why. There was a nest in our Burlington Fairgrounds that we watched, went through a complete 12 weeks of growing, and the nest fell on this particular tree because it's a dead tree. And when we found a juvenile on the ground, We did not realize it at the time until we took it to the Mercer Wildlife Center that this particular eagle had growing issues. It had deformity in its wings. When a feather starts growing in, it grows in through a shunt. This eaglet had more than one feather growing out of that shunt. They were growing in very weird. And it was the first eagle, and hopefully the last, that we've actually seen, and that was verified by our good veterinarian, Erica Miller, who does most of our New Jersey bandings with our birds, that this particular eaglet had 5 toes on each foot. The normal is 4. It had 3 front and 2 back. Unfortunately, based on all of its deformities, this eaglet had to be euthanized for its own well-being. It was a better thing to do for the eaglet because it was in so much pain. But it was a deformity, so it did not get kicked out by the parents.
I've also seen a few more questions related to what do the eaglets do once they are fledged, in terms of how far do they travel from the nest? Will they build their nest near where they, were fledged, or and do they migrate?
So yes, they do migrate, and only in terms of wherever the food's at. So it was really interesting, actually. Was it 2 years ago when we noticed the nest at Mercer Lake for the first time? And it's because I was leading a group of hikers out there, and we noticed 24 eagles that were all sitting in the same tree. And we're like, where did they come from? Why are they here? And if you remember, 2 years ago, we had a super, super cold winter with, below 0 for, a week or whatever. Everything was frozen. Even Mercer Lake was frozen. There was like little patches of openings in the ice for all the birds and everything to get fish. So that's the reason why all those eagles were there. They all flew down from the north because everything up north of us would have been even more frozen than what it was at Mercer Lake. So they all were hanging out there because there was little openings in the ice where they can get fish. So yes, they do migrate, but again, only in search of food. And did I answer the whole question?
Yes, and the question was also wondering about, once they fledge, do they travel long distances before they set up their own territories, or are they likely to start their own families nearby?
So to piggyback off of the 24 eagles in a tree that we saw, they are not very territorial outside of the nesting season. So they will tolerate one another, and especially juveniles. The adult eagles, even when they're nesting, will tolerate a flyby of a juvenile as long as they're kind of, flying by like this, not paying attention. They'll tolerate them, but if there's another adult eagle there, they will get territorial and chase them off because they are a threat. So juveniles, very nomadic. They just kind of wander around and blow where the wind takes them. They could go near, they could go far. Again, it's just, they're very much in their bachelor stage. They're just checking things out and, doing what they want.
Thank you, Christy. And a question on intelligence. How intelligent is an eagle compared to other birds or perhaps household pets? And how do they express emotions such as happiness, sadness, anger? Is there anything that we can recognize in that behavior? Kevin, can you take that one?
I can take the first part as far as intelligence. When you're watching birds in the wild, to be able to tell that answer, it's hard to say. But going off of past experiences of myself visiting down to the American Eagle Foundation down in Tennessee, they have birds that they have trained just like you train any other animal to do stuff at their shows. They have a bird down there that collects money from people and tucks it into a donation box. They have a bird that they train to teach recycling to. You can get a bird to do just as much as you can a cat or a dog, and I've seen that just watching them. As far as the intelligence out in the wild, just watching how they build their nest, how they compensate for a fallen nest, and how they raise their juveniles and their youngs, I'd say they got pretty good intelligence. My
Certainly
personal opinion.
intelligence, they have good eagle intelligence.
They have eagle-tude from time to time,
Yes, yes.
especially our girl at the Wildlife Center.
From what I've read, it seems like how to judge intelligence it's difficult. I mean, certainly we judge intelligence easily from our human perspective, but it's hard to judge an intelligent human against an eagle who's very intelligent at being an eagle. So
Yeah.
that's sometimes a difficult question to answer. And I feel like the same answer for regarding emotions. We kind of can't help but see things through our human lens. So we have a picture that we may get to later on that to me shows an eagle face showing off all kinds of eagle-tude, as Kevin refers to, but it's, and I can assign all kinds of human emotions to the way that looks, but it's kind of hard for us to know for sure what kind of emotion that eagle may or may not be feeling.
They got enough intelligence to be able to survive in the wild for 30 years.
And you know, building on that too, just among birds in general, the more we learn about their intelligence overall, the more I know scientists and researchers are just knocked out by the extent. And again, it is hard, as Kelly mentioned, it's hard to compare, you know, to mammals and you know, really across totally different groups, but within birds as a whole, I think that's something we're just continuing to learn, that there's so much going on there that we might not have had any idea about.
Right.
Somebody had asked a question I had stated earlier. I've been doing this for 12 years as a volunteer. Somebody asked how long I was doing that. And basically 12 years, and I got involved by just emailing New Jersey Fish and Wildlife saying, I enjoyed bald eagles, how can I help? And I got lucky with my wife. About a week later, we were watching the Crosswicks Creek nest in Bordentown.
Okay. Okay. Let's do like maybe two more questions. One question that I don't think was answered was, do eagles remain in the nest during blizzards and hurricanes?
Yes, if you watch the Duke's farm cam during rainstorms, you will see usually the female doing what they call a umbrella. She's got her wings out, and usually the two little ones are sitting right underneath there, keeping as dry as they can. So if there's a video out there from the Pittsburgh nest to where they were sitting in a blizzard and all you saw was the eagle's head on that nest, and eventually she got up and broke out of that thing, but she was sitting on eggs. So yes, they do. Hurricanes, haven't seen that one myself yet.
The timing for hurricanes, at least in this part of the country, doesn't really coincide with most of their nesting time.
No, not at all.
Okay. And then one final question, I'm trying to remember what it was while I navigate this screen here. I don't remember what it was. How about our panelists? Will you pick one more question to answer?
Well, Christy had finished off on one of the questions. Somebody had asked about eaglets in where do they build their nest. The normalcy is within a 50-mile radius of where they're born, they will come back. And a couple of abandonings that have happened, the Crosswicks Creek pair, the male was actually from Fort Dix and the female was out from Monmouth County. And D47 in the Mercer Lake is from Jacobstown. So it kind of holds true that they come back to where they were in an area where they were born to begin their own life because they're familiar with the area.
Okay, thank you. And then one final, do the eagles prefer specific trees to build their nests?
So yeah, it's gotta be a tree that is strong enough to hold a very heavy, very large nest. So they will choose something with nice, big, thick limbs that is sturdy. that's going to be a safe place to build that nest.
And has a high vantage point on, basically being able to see out around them.
Got to have the bird's eye view.
That's right.
Well, thank you all so much. Thank you for tuning in, for asking your wonderful questions. I want to thank David, Christy, and Kevin for all of your wonderful information. We do keep a weekly Eagle blog on both the, it's on the Conserve Wildlife Foundation website, and you can also find a link to it from the Mercer County Parks website. We give you weekly Eagle updates on how the family in this particular nest is doing. So please go to those websites to check that out. Sam, maybe you can find the links to put in the chat while we're doing that. And as I mentioned, our next Eyes on Eagles program is June 7th, same time. We'll just be focusing on what the young look like at that point. So they'll be a month older. We suspect that they're going to be getting ready to fledge. So there might be some different kinds of behaviors to see. I hope you will join us then. We also are starting a summer lecture series that will be conducted via webinar like this. The first one is May 21st. So that is a Thursday. The topic will be pollinators. And again, we'll be joined by Conserve Wildlife Foundation to help us with that. I just want to thank, whoa, that's the eagle tube we were talking about there.
That's it.
That is our girl from the Wildlife Center herself. She's got the perfect eagle tube.
Yeah. I do want to thank County Executive Hughes for his support for our environmental education programs. This is one of the reasons why we're able to do this, and also PSE&G for your support of this program. If you would like to support the Conserve Wildlife Foundation or the Wildlife Center Friends who were our partners in this program, please visit their websites. Their addresses are below. And you can also find out about just the amazing things that they do to help New Jersey wildlife. So thank you all again. I appreciate you all so much, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.